So I see that we've hit 9 o'clock. Thank you for dropping by, and I'll go ahead and get underway with a lesson from Theodore Roosevelt and Henry Cabot Lodge. If anybody is catching up or looking this over for the first time, our Heroes on Zoom sessions that we're doing this semester on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9, they are drawn a chapter at a time from this book. Hero Tales was composed as a labor of love, really, and a mutual challenge between two friends, future President Theodore Roosevelt and his best friend Henry Cabot Lodge. And what these men were creating was a history book for young people, but really for everybody, I think, explaining through stories, and particularly stories of valor of one kind or another, what it really meant to be an American. And so that's a kind of history that some of us think is desperately needed these days. It's well written and enjoyable, so we've been going through it. And we don't read the whole chapter online. You can find this book various places. It's not difficult to secure a free electronic copy from one of several places. It's in print too, and I think it's worth having. Today's chapter, we have made it through the early phases of the American Revolution and all the way to the pivotal battle at Kings Mountain. Kings Mountain is a wonderful national military park here in South Carolina. It'll give you a great hike up to the top of it. And when you get there, terrific battlefield interpretation for a fight that happened, like our talk about Trenton and George Washington, at a low point in the fortunes of the American Revolution. Well, if the Battle of Trenton was a British reversal at a time when the American Revolution was going badly overall, Kings Mountain would occur at a time when the American Revolution was in particularly bad shape here in the South. And that's how they open their little essay. The close of the year 1780 was in the southern states the darkest time of revolutionary struggle. Why so dark? Well, if you're local in South Carolina, it's worth visiting the battlefield at Camden, and particularly when they have their annual reenactment. But the battle at Camden was, of course, a Patriot disaster. And in the aftermath of that great loss by General Horatio Gates, as they write, Tarleton, the light horseman, the man who gave the Swamp Fox his nickname, Tarleton, the light horseman, and Ferguson, the skilled rifleman, had destroyed or scattered all the smaller bands that had been fighting for the Patriot cause. The Red Dragoons rode hither and thither, and all through Georgia and South Carolina, none dared lift up their heads to oppose them. I rarely edit Roosevelt and Lodge, but properly they should have said the Green Dragoons in this case. Perhaps they were taken in by the popular painting, which shows a close quarters fight involving William Washington and shows Tarleton's Dragoons in red, but they were, of course, the Green Jackets. So this is the situation, and it was at this hour that the wild backwoodsmen of the western border gathered to strike a blow for liberty. When Cornwallis invaded North Carolina, he sent Ferguson into the western part of the state to crush out any of the Patriot forces that might still be lingering. Ferguson was a very gallant and able officer, and a man of much influence with the people wherever he went. He was particularly fitted for the scrambling border warfare. He had under him a battalion of regular troops and several other battalions of Tory militia, 11 or 1,200 men. So Ferguson is a formidable opponent. Ferguson is also a Scotsman, so he should have known better than to make the blunder that he made that set off the whole campaign at King's Mountain. You see, Ferguson is tasked with with mopping up operations, with getting rid of these little remnants of the revolution, and learns that there are settlers who are further west and that they might be in sympathy with the revolution too. And he does something very reckless. And as a Scotsman, he should have known better, considering how the Scots had responded to English boasting and threats in the past. Boasting and threats were more likely to make things worse than better as far as a conflict was concerned. And yet Ferguson sends word west to the settlers, who, by the way, have broken the rules by settling so far west in the first place, so clearly they're not that compliant. To these he sent word that if they did not prove loyal to the king, he would cross the mountains, hang their leaders, and burn their villages. Now, wonderfully apt description here. Beyond the mountains, in the valleys of the Holston and Watauga, dwelt men who were stout of heart and mighty in battle. And when they heard the threats of Ferguson, they burned with a sudden flame of anger. Hitherto, the foes against whom they had warred had not been the British, but the Indian allies of the British, Creek and Cherokee and Shawnee. Now that the army of the king had come to their thresholds, they turned to meet it as fiercely as they had met his Indian allies. Now, so far in the hero tales, we can generally identify the hero the tale is about. Now, for the first time, we have more of a focus on a group effort here, less than on individual heroes. They list 3 colonels, appointed colonels of the force that is going to fight on the Patriot side. Backwoodsmen of special note, they called him Sevier, who afterward became governor of Tennessee. Shelby, who afterward became the governor of Kentucky, and Campbell, a Virginian who died in the Revolution. Sevier had given a great barbecue where oxen and deer were roasted whole, while horse races were run, and the backwoodsmen tried their skill as marksmen and wrestlers. In the midst of the feasting, Shelby appeared, hot with hard riding, to tell of the approach of Ferguson and the British. Immediately, the feasting was stopped, and the feasters made ready for war. Sevier and Shelby sent word to Campbell to rouse the men of his own district and come without delay. They sent messengers to and fro in their own neighborhood to summon the settlers from their log huts on the smoke-dotted clearings, and the hunters from their smoky cabins in the deep woods. These word pictures that are drawn by Roosevelt and Lodge, they're meant to communicate some important things with us about these patriot fighters. And these are fighters. The meeting place was at the Sycamore Shoals. This is in Tennessee. On the appointed day, the backwoodsmen gathered 1,600 strong, each man carrying a long rifle. Again, the Kentucky rifle stars in our story. And mounted on a tough, shaggy horse. They were wild and fierce people, accustomed to the chase and to warfare with the Indians. Their hunting shirts of buckskin or homespun were girded in by bead-worked belts, and the trappings of their horses were stained red and yellow. At the gathering, there was a black-frocked Presbyterian preacher, and before they started, he addressed the tall rifleman in words of burning zeal. That backwoods preacher is a man named Samuel Doak. Who is going to have a very distinguished life and the ironic nickname, because he's so important among the Presbyterians, the Presbyterian bishop. Bishops being something that Presbyterians are not in favor of. It's like calling him the Baptist Pope. But Samuel Doak, on that occasion, there is a version of his talk that has come down to us. My countrymen, you are about to set out on an expedition full of hardships and dangers, but one in which the Almighty will attend you. The mother country has her hand upon you, these American colonies, and takes that for which our fathers planted their homes in the wilderness, our liberty. Taxation without representation, the quartering of soldiers in the homes of our people without their consent are evidence that the Crown of England would take from its American subjects the last vestige of freedom. Your brethren across the mountain are crying like Macedonia unto your help. The enemy is marching hither to destroy your homes. Brave men, you are not unacquainted with battle. Your hands have already been taught to war, and your fingers to fight. You have wrested these beautiful valleys of the Holston and Watauga from the savage hand. Will you tarry now until the other enemy carries fire and sword to your very doors? No, it shall not be. Go forth then in the strength of your manhood to the aid of your brethren, the defense of your liberty, and the protection of your homes. And may the God of justice be with you and give you victory. Now, the chances that somebody was carefully writing this precise talk down are pretty low. But this is certainly the substance of the sermon, and he sent them on their way with an admonition to bear the sword of Gideon. Gideon winning a very one-sided victory with a smaller force in the Old Testament. They had chosen not to wait, but to move first, to travel over the mountains, and to attack the larger British force. And when Ferguson heard this, he fell back and picked a defensive position, Kings Mountain, a wooded hogback hill on the borderline between North and South Carolina. Deeming that there he was safe, he supposed before the backwoodsmen could come near enough to attack him, help would reach him. But the backwoods leader felt as keenly as he the need of haste, and choosing out 900 picked men, the best warriors of their force, and the best mounted and armed, they made a long forced march to assail Ferguson before help could come. And you can still follow the path they took. It's called the Over the Mountain Trail, and they would be nicknamed the Over the Mountain Men. The little armies were about equal in numbers. Ferguson's regulars armed with bayonets, and so were some of his Tory militia, whereas the Americans had not a bayonet among them. But they were picked men, confident in their skill as riflemen, and so sure of victory, their aim was not only to defeat the British, but to capture the whole force. Well, these riflemen will surround the bottom of the hill and begin to pick off the British. They have longer range weapons and greater accuracy, and they act together very effectively, swarming forward on foot. Well, swarming forward, but not into bayonet range, but simply into rifle range. And Ferguson finds that his well-trained, well-armed troops who are very effective at traditional tactics, are at a loss here where they're outgunned by the frontiersmen. Time after time, his only choice is to try to drive back these skirmishers with an advance with bayonets. And when the bayonets advance, the skirmishers just fall back further and pick a new shooting position. Their apparent retreat each time begins to lead the British away from the mountain, and then they have to pull back to the mountain to their secure spot. Then the riflemen fall right back in and continue firing. Ferguson, blowing a silver whistle, led these charges sword in hand on horseback. At last, just as he was once again rallying his men, the riflemen of Sevier and Shelby crowned to the top of the ridge. The gallant British commander became a fair target for the frontiersmen, and as for the last time he led his men against them, 7 bullets entered his body, and he fell dead. With his fall, resistance ceased. The regulars and Tories huddled together in a confused mass while the exultant Americans rushed forward. The flag of truce was hoisted, and all British who were not dead surrendered. The victory was complete. Then these backwoodsmen turned around and went home. They had not signed up for the long run. They had chosen to defeat a force that was coming to menace them. It wasn't even particularly political. And as he notes, they could not stay. They dared not leave their homes at the mercy of the Indians. But they had rendered a great service. When Cornwallis heard of the disaster to his trusted lieutenant, he abandoned his march northward and retired to South Carolina. And when he again resumed the offensive, he found his path barred by the stubborn General Greene. So, and a note from a knowledgeable participant today that Ferguson had on a colorful plaid shirt. And of course, an 18th century officer wants to be highly visible, but facing marksmen, highly visible obviously has its test. So, I have a new toy. And if you can hang on with me for a couple of minutes, we can take a nice close look at some artifacts that are relevant to today's presentation. I'm going to get rid of my virtual background for the sake of that. And now that I have this wonderful HD camera, one of a rifleman's accoutrements, one of the things he needed, but often also took pride in, was a powder horn. This example of a powder horn, this one I can handle pretty freely because it is actually a reproduction. Second here. There we go. But I'm trying to get you close enough, get it close enough to you for you to see the fine hand work on this reproduction powder horn that includes, see the beautiful ships there, and a map of Charleston at that time, a map of the harbor. But this kind of hand work, a powder horn was indeed an ordinary cow horn. Here is an original, which belonged to South Carolinian Samuel Gregg. And here's a commemoration on the side of it, also in this art called Scrimshaw of Fredericksburg. And by the 1860s, here we have some hunting dogs. And the fox they are pursuing. By the 1860s, a powder horn is a purely recreational and rather obsolete item. But in 1780, most of these long hunters, the over-the-mountain men, are going to be carrying, hold it down. What do you mean? Doing my best. Oh, I know. To camera moves. Thank you all for being part of my little learn how to use my camera experiment. But you can see here the scrimshaw, the carving into bone or horn art. What are we doing there? That was a part of their culture and would be a way to personalize the horn in which you kept your gunpowder dry. And remember, this battle starts right at the end of a severe shower, but unlike the soldiers at Trenton with their cartridges carried otherwise, these guys are still in pretty good shape to fire their weapons because these are nicely waterproof. So this art of scrimshaw was practiced by sailors on whale tusks and walrus tusks and other items like that, and also practiced on these powder horns. It's the kind of thing people did before they had televisions or smartphones to keep them from doing anything productive in their downtime. So really neat artifacts out of our collection, and thank you for taking some extra time to take a look at those with me. We have been through now, the Revolutionary land portions, largely, of our American Hero Tales. The last one we're going to look at, as far as land battles of the Revolution, I believe the last one, this Thursday, will be the storming of Stony Point. So we'll look over that particular engagement and that adventure story on Thursday. Next week, we have Governor Morris, and then we move all the way forward to the Barbary Pirates. So good stuff. Thank you all for dropping by and spending some time with us this morning, and I hope that you all have a terrific day from here on out.